call the Executive Board to order for Wednesday, June 29th, 2022. Due to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, in accordance with Chapter 22 of the Acts of 2022, suspending certain provision of the open meeting law, public bodies otherwise governed by the open meeting law are temporarily relieved from the requirements that meetings be held in public places, open and physically accessible to the public, so long as measures are taken to ensure public access to the body's deliberations through adequate alternative means. This meeting will be live on Zoom. The public may participate remotely by joining Zoom meeting ID number 854-0032-4335 or by calling 929-205-6099. For additional information about remote participation, please contact Carly Antonellis, Assistant Town Manager at ATM@Ayer.MA.US or 978-772-8220 extension 100 prior to the meeting. All right. So it looks like, just for clarity, we do have our members for the board, that we are missing participants from the Finance Committee. I believe Mr. Smith is ending his term as of the end of June due to personal reasons, and the Town Manager Robert Pomfret did reach out for an alternative for this meeting, but we did not receive any word on anyone attending. First item up on our agenda for action is review and approval of the previous meeting minutes for April 12th, 2022. I did not have any edits or changes.
I did not.
Okay. I'll take a motion to approve the meeting minutes.
I'll make a motion to approve the meeting minutes from April 12th, 2022.
I'll second. Roll call the vote. Ms. Tierney,
Yes.
Mr. Aponte. You're on mute, Mr. Aponte. All right, we'll move on. Mr. Pomfret.
Aye.
And the chair says aye. With one abstain, there is approval of the meeting minutes.
All right.
Okay. Next item on the agenda is fiscal year 2022 and 2023 budget updates. Mr. Pomfret, I'll turn it over to you.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon to everyone. So we sort of put this item on here for any updates for FY 2022, which comes to a conclusion, at least on the books tomorrow, June 30th. And then we kick off July 1. July 1, we start FY 23. If I could, just as the chair mentioned in the beginning, just for everybody's benefit, is the Finance Committee is in a state of transition, which I think is going to be positive in the end. As of right now, there are 3 members, so they do have a quorum. There's Mr. Lou Conrad, and I'm going to forget the 2 other gentlemen's names, but they have been sworn in. They are going to be participating remotely at this time because Mr. Conrad is traveling and he can participate remotely. And we know as of right now, remote participation is extended at least through July 15th, and we anticipate another extension. With that said, as the chair mentioned, I did invite them for representation here. For my update, in talking with Mr. Aponte, we are in need of 1 reserve fund transfer, and that is for the DPW fuel line. It's looking to be about $12,000. As I know many will be shocked when I say this, we were on target until recent increases in fuel over the last couple, even before the last couple of months, but that's when it hit. Our plan is for Fred and I going to ask the FinCom to convene a meeting because we're going to need them to act, as we will the select board, on this reserve fund transfer. The plan is to have the FinCom act on it prior to the select board meeting on July 13th. And Mr. Ponte advises we have till July 15th as the absolute deadline for that. So what we were planning to do is this would be sort of their first meeting in a bit. Is Fred? Hi, Fred. We would go
Hi.
to.
Sorry.
Fred and I will go to the first FinCom, meeting. Explain, and any of you are welcome to come too. It'll be on Zoom. Sort of walk them through the reserve fund transfer process because we have new members and so forth. The DPW director will present that RFT, and then we'll go to the select board on the 13th with that. That's the only RFT that we see right now is that is needed is for the DPW fuel line, and it's relatively new. It's unexpected, largely driven by the ongoing increase in fuel costs. And the DPW director is going to be looking at some fuel efficiency measures, which we'll discuss in a near future date, given the current situation. At that meeting as well, depending when it is, and not to put you on the spot, Mr. Chair, but you're sort of the institutional knowledge of the FinCom. In addition to their action item, which would be that RFT, Fred and I were going to, if you can join us, just talk to them about some of the, sort of do like a brief orientation. And one of the pieces for that is obviously representatives from the FinCom on the buy board. And as folks know, historically, it's been, the chair and the vice chair of the FinCom. Again, that's not fully etched in stone, but I think, for our next meeting, we definitely want to have FinCom there. The final piece is I did meet with the town moderator last night, and he's aware that we need to still fill 2 more seats, and he's aware of that. We're going to continue to advertise that and look to get some more candidates to get a full FinCom. So sort of an update on the FY 22-23. With that, Barbara or Fred, I know we're going to be closing out FY 22 and looking to implement FY 23 per the agenda. Are there any updates that either of you have that the buy board should be aware of, or anything you want to bring up related to the budget?
No, I think as far as I'm concerned, we're just getting things in line to close and obviously to start the new fiscal year. But other than that, there's nothing that I think the buy board needs to know or needs to be aware of.
Okay.
On
Barbara?
my end, I did just do a quick review. I mean, we're not at the end of the year yet, but I just looked at revenues for tax collections of property, and we're over our normal 98%, which is usually where we are at this time in the year. I have set for doing demands the beginning of July, and that'll bring in the majority more for fiscal 22 revenue as far as tax collections are concerned. And I don't see anything else looking like off target.
Good. Barbara, just briefly, if you could share for the buy board, you just had an auction. Could you just give us a
Oh, yeah.
snapshot of that?
Yep.
Please?
So we got permission from the Commissioner of Revenue to do a land of low value closing on 3 of our parcels that had been in tax title for actually many, many years. And we held the auction on, it was Tuesday, June 21st at 1 o'clock. We had competition for all 3 parcels, and they have sold. So we're at the point now where the tax title attorney is preparing I guess you could call it like your closing paperwork. It's different than a traditional mortgage. It's paperwork that'll, give the final amount that they're going to pay. We'll close within the 30 days, and the town will now be able to make those once again taxable parcels. And it was my first auction. It was more exciting than I thought it would be. And we had 1 particular parcel that went for about 8,000 over the assessed value.
Wow. Can you just briefly give us a breakdown financially, the amounts for the 3 or the total?
Yep. So one went for 9,500. The Winthrop Ave went for 900, and the Sandy Pond one that was on the border of Sandy Pond went for, I believe it was 1,600.
Okay.
Those 2 were assessed a little higher than what they went for, but that's not that uncommon, especially when they were only assessed for about $2,000 each. So, but it is good to get something off the books. We also just had one of our parcels that I had put into land court back in 2018 have a final judgment, and that was a parcel on Littleton Road that is wetland. I believe the conservation has some interest in it because it is in front of land that's already town owned.
Okay.
And I'm waiting for a judgment that I'm hoping will come any day because I put it in land court at the same time. That happens to be right next door to the other one on Littleton Road. And once that comes into fruition, we'll be able to get those either sent to if conservation or whatever the town decides to do with it.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any questions through the chair? Any other comments or questions or concerns about either FY22, which we're closing up, or FY23, which we're about to implement before we begin to plan for FY24? It never seems to end, as they say. But any questions, anything else on updates?
No questions for me. Thank you.
All right.
Nothing for me.
So the next item that we have on number 4 is just a discussion on a development of a plan for the use of the ARPA funds, the American Recovery Act funds, which everyone is familiar with. The town's 2.6 million that we've received on that, as everybody knows, there's only been commitments for 2 projects as authorized by the select board and recommended by the by board. That's the Westford Road sewer main replacement project, which is actually underway if you've been out there. That project actually came in lower than the anticipated amount, so we're not going to have to use all of the ARPA funding that was authorized for that project. And then the Spectacle Pond water transmission line, that project is being procured and teed up on that front. But it leaves, I mean, those 2 projects of the 2.6 million that basically committed about 1.3 million. So it leaves a considerable balance. And just for everybody's benefit, as a reminder, under the program, we have to commit, we, meaning the town, has to commit those funds by December 30th of 2024, and they have to be expended by December 30th of 2026. The other piece, Fred has set up, as recommended by this group and approved by the select board, we have contracted with CLA to do all of the reporting for the town on the ARPA, because it's considerable. That was up to $15,000 funded from the ARPA funds. They will also, and this is a piece we wanted to talk about today, is part of that agreement with CLA is they would work with the town to develop a plan for the use of the remaining funds. Now, as we've discussed, those funds Barbara has in an interest-bearing account, and it's not necessarily we have to rush to use the balance. So we're gaining interest on that, but we wanted to discuss how should we proceed in developing a plan for the remaining of the funds. And last piece is that final plan would be subject to approval by the select board. And at some point, we would like to come sooner than later to present to the select board some suggestions. And also, we don't necessarily need to reinvent the wheel. As many of you are aware, a lot of towns have different municipalities have different plans for the use of the funds. Some of it's a competitive process or so forth. But are there any initial thoughts or initial concerns, something that you really think we should look at, something we shouldn't, in terms of developing the plan for the remainder of the funds?
I do have one question, Robert. At one of the previous meetings, you mentioned looking at a program where we got feedback from the departments, I think it was, about items that they thought would be beneficial to the community. Have you had any ability to look into that further?
Yes, excellent point. So just to refresh everyone's memory from Selectman Hood, we were looking, so there are all departments have needs and all departments have some projects, which we begin to put a list on that are eligible for ARPA. And as Fred knows, that's part of the reason we have CLA is also going to vet the projects to confirm that they're ARPA eligible. And So I think at our next meeting of this group, and even maybe the next meeting of the select board, can discuss what I'd call the preliminary list from departments, and that's still being developed on potential ARPA projects. The question, I think, is what a lot of towns have done is, so we have, what I said, roughly, for the sake of discussion, 1.3 million remaining. What some towns have done is taken a portion of that, as Scott has mentioned, and put together a competitive program. So whether it's for departments, and some have even opened it up townwide, so you'd have a pool of money in which you have a program where people would, apply for, think of it as sort of like an internal grant from that. I think that there's a lot of benefits to that, in the sense that it generates, a lot of public interest and public participation with that. My opinion, I don't think we should obviously use the entire balance for the competitive program, but I think, to Scott's point, I think we have two next steps. One is to get the departmental list to everybody of projects, and we can boil that down also to make sure they're ARPA eligible. And then look at developing a competitive program for a portion of it.
If I may, Mr.
Yeah.
Chair, I think it's important to know that ARPA funds can be used for virtually anything, as long as you're not replenishing reserves and those type of things, OPEB and all that. It's pretty much wide open now. The final ruling for the ARPA funds was you can use it for virtually anything. So just to know.
The only suggestion I can think of is, would it be beneficial to have the CLA consultant attend a by-board meeting and maybe make us some suggestions on what to look towards?
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
Barbara, that's a good idea. Why don't we, I think, because CLA, when Fred and I talked with them, that's part of their contractual agreement. So I think that's an excellent idea. We should have them come and make a brief presentation to the by board. And they also said they'd be happy to come to the select board meeting at the appropriate time in the FinCom. But why don't we get CLA teed up for our next meeting of this group?
Good idea.
Sounds good.
Excellent. Thank you.
And why don't Fred, what Fred and I will do as well, sorry, Fred, we'll get CLA teed up, and Fred and I will take a look at a couple of the competitive programs that are out there. I mean, why reinvent the wheel? And we'll get to everybody sort of a boilerplate on a potential competitive program. So I think between looking at having a portion of it be competitive in CLA's input, and then for our next meeting, I think we'll be in a position where we'll have this further shaped to then go to the select board.
All right.
Sounds
Sounds like a good plan.
All right. Moving right along, the number 5, discussion on review and update of the town's financial policy. So I know we discussed earlier in this year, the policies are due for a review and update. I know Barbara had volunteered and is sort of serving as the central repository on that. I think Scott has sent some changes. We've talked about some changes. When I met with the select board last, I think one of the town's goals overall is we want to bring this to conclusion, meaning we need to do the review and update on the town's financial policy. So what I was going to propose for everybody's thoughts today is, I'm a firm believer, I think we need to set a date that everybody gets everything to Barbara. And then Barbara and I and Fred can compile, and Barbara did this before, we can compile what those proposed changes are. And then this group can review and make sort of the final, recommendation to the select board. And of course, let's get the FinCom looped in on that as well. But I think we need to give this a date. It's not a criticism. It's been crazy times, as I say, but I think we want to get this, this next revision and update completed. So what are folks' thoughts on how we should proceed?
If you want, I could resend out the Word document that has Scott's notes and Pat Diamond's notes and some of my notes on it to everyone. so they can see what we have so far.
Okay, why don't we do that? I think that's a first.
Okay.
That would be
step. I know you've-
helpful.
I know you've sent it out, but we've got
Mhm.
some new folks and it's been a while, so.
Yeah, if you could tell
Barbara
me
to
who the
send-
new people are.
Ponte,
I meant the new finance committee members. I
Yeah.
need their emails. But yeah.
Yeah, I think my approach, or at least my thought process, would be to give a couple of months to process. It's summertime, so we should be somewhat wrapping up for a couple of months. So perhaps late August, early September.
Yeah,
can provide
September's a
the
good
date.
time for my office. It's a
I mean, if it works for Barbara,
Yeah.
let's just go
Yeah.
with that.
yeah, that sounds good to me. I
So what
did
if
have a
we did-
couple quick things I wanted to
Yeah.
ask you real quick. This may not be the time on it, but there were two items I just wanted to ask people to think about. And one is it's been recommended to me that we remove the investment policies and keep them as a separate policy because I'm supposed to review that policy annually. And I do review it, but that way I can keep it separate and present to the select board when I review with our financial advisors. Just to keep in mind when you're reviewing the Word document. And then the other thing I wanted to mention is I didn't know if we should put something in regarding the cannabis money. Those were the two main things that I've been looking at.
Yes. Good. And when we talk about on number 6, the goals and objectives, I had a little thing on the cannabis piece. And I know, Scott, we talked about this briefly with the select board when we're talking about goals. I've got a list of some of the policies, proposed policies we've discussed, which I'll bring up in a moment. So what if we do this with the financial policy? So Barbara, if you're willing to still serve as the central clearinghouse, that would be great. So you're going to send out what we have to date, which I think is mostly from Scott and Pat, and there'll probably be more stuff, from Scott and others.
Mm-hmm.
I think to Scott's point, if we set maybe a September date for that initial deadline, so all of us look at it, why don't we also send it when Fred and I go to the first FinCom meeting, talk with them about it, put them on that deadline to look at it. And Carly and I can send it to all of the departments saying, with a September deadline. So at least when the buy board meets in September, we'll have at least a lot of the review pieces.
Okay.
That sound
good.
like
That sounds good.
good.
yeah, okay. And so we'll set that piece up on that. Now, just quickly related to that, it sort of segues into the goals and objectives to number 6. As Barbara mentioned, so some of the things we have been talking about, in terms of specific substantive policies to the financial policies that are new. One is the cannabis. So Scott was one of the architects a few years back where we came up with a standard policy using the meals tax, as everybody's familiar with, to supplement the OPEB contribution. And I think that policy has worked very well over several years now. And that came from Scott and the FinCom initially. We now receiving this cannabis funding, and we've discussed before, what do we do with the cannabis funding? I mean, obviously, Barbara deposits, it goes into the, the general fund and so forth, but do we, and maybe part of that's rhetorical question, but I think what do we do with the cannabis funding? Is there a specific initiative, policy, project that we want to put that towards? And if the answer is yes, then we just need to verify, if we can do that. And I think ideally we should at least have the discussion, and if there is a policy, get that in this next revision. Barbara, do you by any chance have where we're at as far as what the last amount was?
I can look that up if you give me just a minute.
Not to put you on the spot, I'm sorry, but any initial thoughts on cannabis funds?
My thinking right now is, it's obviously, you said general fund revenue, so that's probably counted as a local receipt on the recap. So if you use that money for something else, then that's going to not be a local receipt, so it won't help to reduce the tax rate. So just a thought.
Okay,
Well, so what we do is we set up the policy where it is allocated towards the OPEB expenditures. So, and it's not a full funding of the OPEB, it goes towards it. So when we go to town meeting, we word the spend article in that specific manner where, you know, X amount of dollars is coming from meals tax, because, you know, we, at the time we set that up, we understood that we could not emphatically say all of this money is going to go towards this. So it's more of a guidance, and it comes together when we put together the spend articles for town meeting. I think quantification is going to be the big part, see how much money we actually have to work with on the cannabis side of things. And also like I guess the legality of allocating it towards something is if whether it's, you know, specific programs or just kind of putting it towards a specific usage as a guidance, if you will.
I think I recall they did determine it's similar to meals and tax where it's general fund money. So we,
Okay.
you know, we can, Fred, is there any chance Carrie can look that up? I seem to be having an issue with my computer, not wanting to respond to me.
Yeah, let me ask her.
Thank you. Sorry.
and perhaps through the chair, perhaps Barbara, I know we'll get the thumbnail sketch from Carrie on this. Perhaps if you wouldn't mind, when you get a chance, you could send out to this group sort of the history to date on this, because
sure.
Scott's point, I know it's a new source, and there's been some interruptions, you know, with that because they were closed for a period of time due to COVID. But I think to Scott's point, the quantification, and we're still trying to get a sense of the general baseline.
Sure. Yeah,
That,
I can do
the more
an
detail,
account.
that would be great.
Yep, I can do an account history. I just, I don't know why it's not letting me bring it
No,
up
no
at the
worries.
moment, but, and then just, I can scan that in and get that sent to you. Not a problem.
So related to so we've got this issue of the cannabis. We've also talked about in the past about having a definitive UDAG policy. So as everybody knows, the UDAG funds are under the authorization of the select board, and to use them requires a vote of the select board. And they were intended to be used specifically for economic development and infrastructure projects. And historically, in most cases, it has been used in that case. However, and why I think we need a policy, and not that anything nefarious was done or so forth, but Scott had mentioned this at the last select board meeting, and I tend to agree. There were times where UDAG funds were used in a way in which it should have perhaps been either an RFT or other process. And again, I just want to stress again, nothing was done with ill intent or so forth, but I think we need to develop a policy that affirms back to the use of being for economic development infrastructure. And then historically, at least in the time I've been here, that the select board has always voted whatever the expenditure was to have it replenished at a future town meeting, subject to the availability of funds. And you're all familiar, you know, we've replenished quite a bit of that. And there's a question, I know before Lisa retired, she felt that perhaps it shouldn't always be replenished, but I think some of that was because there's a little bit of accounting work there. That's my own observation, but I think we should look at having a UDAG policy, and then have that policy, have that in the financial policies, and have that communicated to everyone. And I would be happy to take a first pass at that and get that to everybody. And for the next meeting, and I'll talk with Fred and Barbara and everybody. Why don't we, I think we should get that teed up for this version of the financial policies.
I agree. I think also where we now have a good housing developing upstairs, they're professionals.
Yeah.
They know what they're doing, and I agree. It could be just an internal policy.
328,000, by the way.
How much?
328. Okay,
328,000
yes,
from cannabis.
cannabis.
So we haven't received our June 30th yet,
And it's
Uh,
quarterly, right?
and it's quarterly. So that doesn't include the fourth quarter. I was able to finally bring it up to Fred,
Okay.
but thank you for,
Oh.
last year we did 530,000 in fiscal 21.
So we can move this forward for the next meeting. So Barbara, when you get a chance, and that doesn't mean like, it doesn't have to be today, but if you could send the accounting of it since we've started to receive it to the buy board.
Yep.
And why don't we look into also to Selectman Hood's point? Let's do a little research to see what other folks that do receive this, what other towns are doing or not doing. And I can also ask town council too for some legal, let's find out what we can do and what we can't do. And then I think
Okay.
for our next meeting, if we have the quantification, as Scott mentioned, that we know to date, and maybe we'll have the June payment by then. And then we
Mhm.
at least know what we can do and can't do, and everybody think about what we should do with it. We
Okay.
could
I'll reach
come
out
up-
to the auditors to ask their opinion.
Yeah,
Good
that'd be
idea.
great, Fred. Yeah, okay.
So I was able to see so far in the 3 years we've had the cannabis tax, it's $1,153,544.56.
And that's since when? Since the
Fiscal
end?
2020, which was the first year we started. And that
Okay.
year was our smallest year.
Okay. Okay. One other one that's sort of near and dear to me, but I'm sure to others, and we talked about this before, is a real property acquisition policy. So for everybody's benefit, obviously, that from time to time, and it's seen more recently, and I think it'll be just coming down the pike some more, is there are times where the town has had to acquire real property. And as we all know, that's a whole process that it requires, appraisal, phase 121E. It requires the select board to authorize it for placement on the town meeting warrant. It requires action by town meeting. And we're not going to change the Massachusetts legal requirements for property acquisition, which my own opinion, find it's clunky and counterintuitive sometimes. That all being said, I think what we talked about before is, one, we don't really have a clear defined policy on that. Obviously, we have to follow state law, which we do. But also, what if any, do we want to have any benchmarks or metrics to help guide, do we acquire this property? And if so, how and what have you? I know I'm speaking somewhat still conceptual without specifics, but I think we need to look at moving in a direction where we have a clearer policy on acquisition of real property. And I think it's going to raise itself some more as the conservation fund continues to grow, and we tend to look at acquisition of open space and so forth. So that's one of the other ones that I had from the list. And I'd be willing to, at least for our next meeting, and I talked to Carly about this, would be willing to take a look at sort of doing some pre-work that we could get to folks to further shape that. Are there others besides, and we're all going to look at it again, and we know that there are some updates and some reviews to the general policies. Are there some other substantive areas that folks would like to see or would like to prioritize in this revision? And as we know, the financial policies are a living document that we continue to review and update periodically. But as we look at this revision, is there something else we need to prioritize or address? And you may find that as you look over it again before we meet again, but.
Well, one thing which I haven't looked at the document in a while is in tune with the UDAG policy is the reserve fund transfer. I think it's called out in a section, but maybe something where we can just add the details and more specific guidelines for how that should be used, because I know that, and this was kind of the point around the UDAG policy where if there's unexpected expenses within a fiscal year, that should go against the regular budget, and then the budget gets depleted down. And if it needs a reserve fund, it should be treated as a reserve fund transfer towards the end of the year, when it depletes its budget with that explanation of reason being it's because we had this, say, extra $50,000 that we had to spend earlier in the year. I think we need to quantify, or sorry, put some guidelines around that, because, you know, in the past, and Robert, this goes back to when I was on the finance committee, that, you know, we would have, but, you know, departments coming to us mid-year saying, well, we have to spend $25,000 on something that we didn't budget for. And it is just, you know, is that the right time for, or the right process? Because I mean, it does qualify for a reserve fund transfer on the fact that it wasn't budgeted for and it was unexpected. However, you know, where does that fit in the timeline of how to process that?
If I may,
Please, Fred.
that's a separate fund, so that's not a reserve fund transfer. You could certainly reclass the expense, but you wouldn't be a reserve fund transfer, because the reserve fund is in the general fund. So,
Can you clarify that, please?
yeah, the reserve fund transfers is anything that happens in the general fund. Somebody's overexpended and something unforeseen and extraordinary, we can transfer from the reserve fund to that particular account. However, if a department is short on their omnibus budget, they can certainly do a reclass of an expense from the UDAG to that, but it's not a reserve fund transfer. I guess it's just semantics.
Okay. Yeah, maybe we can have an offline conversation just to kind of align our thoughts on it, and then we can put something in writing for the policies.
I agree with it. I was going to suggest, and I know Fred you had some thoughts on the reserve fund policy, and Scott, I know you as well. So maybe the three of us at some point could connect and take a look at that and see what we need to do there.
Yeah.
I think all good points. And I do agree, Scott, I think there can be some further clarification there.
I think anytime you get stuff on paper and have a policy is a really good thing. I do.
Yeah.
So.
You know, and I think some of it's education. Speaking, you know, in some of the departments, I'm just saying, you know, we say it's the criteria is unforeseen or extraordinary. And then you see that that's open to some level of interpretation. And I have felt over the years, I think we need to look and further define that and educate that to folks. You know, extraordinary is your failure to budget correctly or what have you. Is that extraordinary?
Well, a good example is the fuel at the DPW. The costs were sky high. They didn't budget for it, so now we have to do a transfer. So that's a pretty good example.
Okay. Yeah, but the other counterpoint to what I was saying is that if you have an expense that comes up, say that was unbudgeted, you know, we'll just use a round number. Say it was $10,000, and you know, what kind of control do we have over a department spending that, and then just like in November, and then coming back at the end of the year and saying, well, you know, 8 months ago I spent, you know, $10,000 on this. And that's really the first point that the finance committee and the select board actually have any visibility into it. So that's something that we need to be cognizant of as we kind of pull together that policy. Because if it's something that would most likely trigger a reserve fund transfer at the end of the year, if we're going to make them use their budget, then there should be some kind of an approval process ahead of time.
Yep.
Idea.
Good point. Any other, so besides, obviously, and there's going to be more stuff, please submit that, you know, to Barbara, you know, edits and updates and so forth. I think one of the things that we want to look at too is wherever there's any thresholds, I think we should look at, like, for example, what triggers a capital or debt exclusion. I think I'm going to say 350,000, and I'll probably have the wrong number. I don't have it in front of me, but those type of things. Is it 450? I
think it's 450.
Yeah. So as you do your next review, more detail, would be interested, because one of the things why we do these reviews is let's look at all of those various benchmark quanta that are in there. But for the purpose of today, before we move on to the other items, are there any other immediate substantive policy ideas or points for this revision that folks wanted to bring up?
Nothing else I can think of.
Yeah, no, I think we have a good baseline
Yeah.
to start working on for this update.
Agreed. Okay, moving to number 6, discussion on goals and objectives of the executive buy board for the year ahead. And as many of you know, because you're on other boards and committees, this is usually the time of year where we take stock of where we're at, but also looking to in the year ahead. So a year from now, when we're at this meeting, you know, say June 30th of 2023, what do we realistically want to have accomplished, you know, in the year ahead? So for example, we know one of our goals already is going to be the successful review and update of the town's financial policies. We know that this group is going to play a role. Another one is on the ARPA fund plan, as we discussed. We know that our sort of our standing objectives of this group is, you know, to meet periodically, meet regularly to review financial matters, review the budget, discuss, you know, and make recommendations. So that's sort of standard. Would be interested as to what some of the other goals and objectives for the year ahead. And we have some standing work. I mean, obviously, one of our major goals is going to be the development of the FY24 budget, along with the FinCom and the select board and so forth. The other thing I see that we should maybe begin to discuss, maybe briefly at the next meeting and then maybe at the August meeting, we usually play a role in developing the budget calendar for the whole year, which is subject to select board approval, which they usually approve by the first meeting in October. And I think what we discussed with the budget calendar, now that town meeting has moved up, we still have this compression problem. And I'm just saying we need to look at from the time that the budget is, quote, finalized and the time that the select board approved, there's still a compression with this sort of rushed still at the end. So we want to definitely look at the budget calendar in more detail, you know, sooner than later. But what are some other things potentially that folks would like to see or accomplish in the year ahead?
I'm going to have to put some thought on that. I was going to say the financial policies.
Okay, yep. I'll throw a couple others because I made a list and I can get this to folks from things we're talking about. So a couple other things that are on the horizon, because we're sort of the advisory group. We don't have any authority, but advisory. I know that Scott had mentioned, and this is we'll start with the capital planning committee and we need to have a meeting, but it'll overlap here, is looking at the next 5 to 10 years from capital on the major projects, because there's some major things coming down the pike. And I don't mean to steal your thunder, Scott, and if you want to elaborate on that, but that is something we need to really look at. And one of the missing pieces that many of you know that we continue to talk about is the same type of capital planning from the school district. Though it's a separate entity, the taxpayers of Ayer, it impacts us. So I think long range capital is one of the things.
Yeah, so just put a little more context on kind of my
Please.
vision on that is there's a magic schedule that Lisa and I had put together years ago that shows all of the overrides that in their impact on the tax rate, which also shows when they're coming off the tax rate. And when we were going through, that was developed when we were looking at the high school project. So that's actually an excellent tool, I think, when we look at the long-term large projects that are going to have debt exclusions in order to try to plan them out to say, you know, like maybe this year isn't the right year for, you know, a $5 million project, but next year would be a lot better for the taxpayers. To just, you know, kind of pull together the mapping of the debt exclusion impact on taxes, but then also try to overlay the known projects that we have, which would be from the town and also from the school district, to try to align that where we're mitigating as much of an impact on the large projects going forward, just for like 5 to 10 years.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we can definitely do that.
Yep. There were two that I mentioned to the select board that I will spearhead, but it's going to be subject also to review from here, as well as the FinCom, and ultimately require select board approval. One is the town's compensation and classification system is now almost 8 years old, and they should be reviewed and updated general practice every 5 years. And that was the intent. And then this thing called COVID happened. But I had said to the board, I would like, as for one of my goals for the board, is within a year from now, tops, have looked at a review and update of the compensation and classification plan. And there are a lot of pieces there. Scott knows when he was when we had the personnel board, but we need to look at that review and also see, there could be a financial impact, to that. So that's one of the things from sort of my office, but I see this group, having input on that as the compensation and classification plan. We also have from my office, we have, it sounds like a broken record, but we're going to fix that record, is the ClearGov project. I know that we've been transitioning that from Lisa to Fred in my office, but I'd like to get the ClearGov project up off the ground so we can do the fun part, which is look at it and tweak it and see what works. And the intent is to have that serve as the basis for the budget book moving forward. And it also does have the capability to also do the annual report. So I think that's, again, something that's overdue, and we need to get that hit home.
I will reach out to ClearGov again.
Yeah,
I have to say, I kind of let that slip a little bit, just trying to get caught up here, but
yeah.
I'll make a note of that, make sure I do that.
Thank you, Fred.
The one other one, and again, or go ahead, Scott. I talked to him.
Oh, no, I was just saying thank you to Fred for taking the initiative to contact them.
Yeah. The other one, and some of you heard about this, and it also came up some even at the town meeting, but to put this on here, and this came from the discussion with the select board at their last meeting, is when we want to do a professional review and analysis of the town's mutual aid agreements. And, this came up with the staffing increase at the fire department, the issue of mutual aid and the ambulance as well. So we run an excellent ambulance department. I mean, we have 2, and we have the advanced life support. However, if we're doing all of these mutual aid calls and so forth, what is that cost? Is there an opportunity for further funding? And I know that the fire chief, and I met with him yesterday, and the deputy chief are putting together for the future select board meeting an initial presentation to begin to get into that detail. So that's something that I know the board is interested in, the FinCom, I am, the public has weighed in. We want to get a full understanding and look at, are there opportunities that we're missing, or are there future funding opportunities to help those costs? That's another one that I'll sort of put on the ever-growing list, but that's sort of in progress. I see a structural one that I'm hopeful will come to fruition. I know that we had this hiccup with the finance committee. That's nobody's direct fault, at least nobody on this meeting, and that we're getting the FinCom reconstituted. But the finance committee really is a committee of town meeting, and it's intended to be independent of, by virtue of being appointed by the moderator and being a committee of town meeting, independent of the select board and the administration, if you will. I'd like to see, from my vantage point, I think we all would in the year ahead, the finance committee, getting reconstituted and playing more of a role that it had not that long ago. And Scott was involved with that for years, more of a role in the budget development process and so forth. And I'm hearing more and more of that from residents and the public is, where is the FinCom in its role? So I think we're moving in the right direction, but I think that's more of a structural, symbolic goal for the year ahead, meaning to get them more involved.
Okay.
Yeah, totally agree with that.
Yeah. So I know we're going to continue to talk about this. I mean, any other thoughts on goals and objectives for the year ahead? I mean, there's no shortage, as we've got quite a list on the table now, but any other thoughts?
I think that's more than enough to keep us busy,
Yeah.
to be honest.
Yeah.
I agree.
And then just two other sneak peeks. One is that, just so the intent of the select board is, and Dr. Renda, the superintendent of schools, has indicated this publicly, is we'll be looking to have them submit a letter of intent for an elementary school project, coming up this January is the deadline, January, for that letter. So there's another thing that this group, I think, will play a role in looking at is that, and that's a longer term project, but to start that process. And then the other one is we'll be coming to the select board on July 13th to talk a little bit about the future of the senior center and that senior center project. One of the biggest challenges has been finding a site. But what I'm getting at is that project is still, and that need is still out there and has yet to be brought to fruition. But for the next meeting, if you think of something that, for an annual goal, something that needs to be prioritized, let's continue to have this dialogue at these meetings. 7 is any new business for today, meaning new business we want to get on the table, for the next meeting, or any new business or topics.
I don't have anything myself, other than, I guess it would be financial policies would be the big item.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't have anything other than what we've talked about.
Got it. All right. Scheduling of the next meeting. I think to keep the ball moving, and I know, we get into summer and the summer schedule, we should look to have a July meeting. And I think for that July meeting, and I'll send out sort of the next steps we've talked about today to the group, but I think we really should have a July meeting to keep things moving forward. I believe we have every reason to believe that the remote participation thing is going to be continued past July 15th. And I know that seems to work best for folks on the buy board. So do we want to look at normally we've been doing Tuesdays at 2, and this one we moved to Wednesday at 2. Do we want to pick a July date, maybe towards the end of the month or so forth? How do we want to proceed? Yeah.
26 would be good for me, Tuesday, if you do the end of the month.
Okay. And I understand that if some folks are away, I get it, vacations and so forth, we can fill you in, folks. But I think it's important we get with the magnitude of stuff we have. And I know we've had to cancel some things and postpone some things, but we look to try to get to a monthly meeting.
Yeah, 26 works for me.
26th. So that would be Tuesday. That'd be Tuesday, the 26th, July 26th at 2 p.m. on Zoom. And let me just put this, just one caveat, like right now, as we're on this meeting, the remote participation expires July 15th, but I should buy a Powerball ticket because I believe they're going to extend it. If for some reason they don't, we'll regroup and reassess how we move forward. But I think we're going to be on solid ground to do a remote on July 26th at 2. All right.
All right,
Good.
excellent. Thank you, Robert.
Thank you,
Anything else?
everyone.
I'll open up to any questions or comments before we make a motion to adjourn. No?
Nope.
Okay, I'll take a motion to adjourn then.
Don't move.
I second.
All right, roll call the vote. Mr. Aponte,
Aponte, aye.
Ms. Kearney,
Aye.
Mr. Pompriant,
Aye.
and the chair says aye. Thanks very much, everyone. Have a great afternoon.
All right, you too.
Thank you. You too.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.